so he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold. Look, these are the colors that are being used in the Vatican today. And you know, talking about 7 hills, Rome is known as the city sits on the 7 hills. And look what he says, adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. You see, the Bible is describing a world religious system that is full of abomination and fornication. It has nothing to do with God. Religion of inclusion, with the exception of those who follow Jesus. This is a description of the Great Tribulation.
Isidore de Cradles is a name given to certain apocryphal papal letters forged by Isidore. In our current day, it is sometimes extended to cover not only the papal letters forged by Isidore and contained in his collection, but the whole collection, although it contains other documents, authentic or apocryphal, written before Isidore's time. Today, most everyone agrees that these so-called papal letters are and were deliberate forgeries. These documents, which number about 100, appeared suddenly in the 9th century and are nowhere mentioned before that time. The most ancient manuscripts of them that we have are from the 9th century, and their method of composition shows that they were made up of passages and quotations of which today we know the sources, and we are in a position to prove that the pseudo-Isidore makes use of documents written long after the times of the popes to whom he attributes them. Many popes of the first 3 centuries are made to quote from documents that in reality did not appear until the 4th or 5th century, and various later popes, up to Gregory the First, 590-604, are found employing documents dating from the 6th, 7th, and 8th centuries and the early part of the 9th. The Middle Ages were definitely deceived by this huge forgery, but during the Renaissance, men of learning and the canonists generally began to recognize the fraud. In fact, 2 cardinals, John of Torquemada, 1468, and Nicholas of Cusa, 1464, had declared the earlier documents to be forgeries, especially those purporting to be by Clement and Anacletus. Afterwards, suspicion began to grow. Erasmus died 1536, and canonists who had joined the Reformation, such as Charles du Moulin, died 1568, or Catholic canonists like Antoine Leconte died 1586, and after them, the Centuriators of Magdeburg in 1559 put the question squarely before the learned world. Nevertheless, the official edition of the Corpus Juris in 1580 upheld the genuineness of the false decretals, many fragments of which are to be found in the Decretum of Gratian. The Corpus Juris Canonici, lit. Body of Canon Law, is a collection of significant sources of the canon law of the Catholic Church that was applicable to the Latin Church. Such has been replaced by the 1917 Code of Canon Law, which went into effect in 1918. The 1917 Code was later replaced by the 1983 Code of Canon Law, the codification of canon law currently in effect for the Latin Church. In 1990, Eastern Catholic canon law was codified in the Code of Canons of the Eastern Churches, which is currently in effect for the Eastern Catholic Churches. As a partial explanation of this, it is enough to recall the case of Antonio Agustin, died 1586, the greatest canonist of that period. Augustine seriously doubted the genuineness of the documents, but he never formally repudiated them. It is said that he likely felt he had not sufficient proof at hand, so he simply shirked the difficulty. We must also remember that, owing to the irritating controversies of the time, anything like an impartial and methodical discussion of such a subject was an utter impossibility. In 1628, the Protestant Blondel published his decisive study, Pseudo Isidorus et Turianus Vapulantes. Since then, the apocryphal nature of the Decretals of Isidore has been an established historical fact. The last of the falsi decretals that had escaped the keen criticism of Blondel were pointed out by 2 Catholic priests, the brothers Ballerini, in the 18th century. The collection of Isidore might be grouped into three categories. First, a list of 60 apocryphal letters or decrees attributed to the popes from St. Clement, 8897, to Melchiades, 311, 314 inclusive. At least 58 of the 60 letters are definitely forgeries. These begin with a letter from Aurelius of Carthage requesting Pope Damasus, 366-384, to send him the letters of his predecessors in the chair of the apostles. And this is followed by a reply in which Damasus assures Aurelius that the desired letters were being sent. This correspondence was meant to give an air of truth to the false decretals and was the work of Isidore. The second category of the grouping of this collection of Isidore would be a treatise on the primitive church and on the Council of Nicaea, written by Isidore, and followed by the authentic canons of 54 councils. Thirdly, the letters mainly of 33 popes, from Sylvester, 314-335, to Gregory II, 715-731. Of these 33 letters, at least 30 of the letters are known to have been definite forgeries. In our current day, everyone should be made aware of the continual mass modifications being made to the biblical writings as a result of the newest translations of these biblical writings. Suspiciously coinciding with and following the year 1844, much as a result of works of Westcott and Hort, together with the discovery of the Codex Sinaiticus, actually believed by many to be fraudulent, as well as many pointing out what appears to be a great amount of corruption. Indeed, there are many who do suspect that the favored older manuscripts, Codex Vaticanus, Codex Alexandrinus, Codex Sinaiticus, while being routinely awarded the highest value and prominence, is possibly due to the significant influence and power of the papacy upon all Bible translation societies, Bible schools, seminaries, and Christian denominations. In 1999, the Catholic and Lutheran churches agreed to a joint declaration on the doctrine of justification that resolved many of the theological issues at the heart of the schism responsible for the Reformation. This document has now been welcomed and affirmed by the Anglican Communion. In 2016, a document released by an evangelical Protestant group, Reformanda Initiative, drew a distinction between individual Catholics and the unchecked dogmatic claims and complex political and diplomatic structure of the institutional Catholic Church. It concluded, the issues that gave birth to the Reformation 500 years ago are still very much alive in the 21st century for the whole Church. There are, in fact, many issues that would currently prevent a complete reconciliation and block the prospect of a reunification of the two primary traditions, i.e., Catholicism and Protestantism. Many Christian groups and individual believers would continue to resist a unification of the church due to what is often referred to by many as simply religious sectarianism. There is somewhat of a consensus regarding biblical translations, using what is generally referred to as the preferred and accepted manuscripts. This is certainly true among most Catholics, Orthodox, and Protestants. Such consensus seems to be based upon their total numbers or their Christian population. Such consensus seems to be served by two facts, of which seems to be the primary catalyst in forging such an agreement. First, there is the strength of the ecumenical movement, and second is an apparent consensus within what we might refer to as modern biblical scholarship. What is often overlooked, however, is the tangible influence of Catholicism, adding their weight and helping to form consensus. The Codex Vaticanus, Codex Alexandrinus, Codex Sinaiticus, and authenticity of a BC Septuagint should all be approached with valid suspicion, being encouraged by the historical precedents set by the papacy regarding such fraudulent documents to support their claims. Evidence and suspicion exists today among various leaders within the church. However, for the most part, their voices are not being heard, primarily due to the weight of the opinion of the majority. Those that are within the majority are not necessarily correct in their assertions and opinions. We need only look to church history and the conflicts throughout the church age, as well as a study of biblical prophecy, to realize that never is the majority correct in their assertions simply because they are or make up the majority. known by many for years as the main authority concerning such manuscripts. Dean Bergen describes the poor workmanship of Vaticanus as follows. The Codex B, known as the Vaticanus, comes to us without a history and without any recommendation of any kind except that of its antiquity. The reality is that it bears traces of a much careless transcription in every page throughout. The multitude of mistakes which the original transcriber has made are of perpetual recurrence. This he writes within his book covering the last 12 verses of Mark. Authored by John William Bergen, Oxford and London, James Park and Company, co-heirs, 1871 on page 73. Dean Bergen, this same authority concerning such manuscripts, describes the Sinaiticus as follows. The Sinaiticus has also been corrected by at least 10 revisers between the 4th and 12th centuries. This is written in his book entitled The Revision Revised, authored by John William Bergen, London, published by John Murray, 1883, page 13. The Codex Sinaiticus Project readily admits that no other early manuscript of the Christian Bible has been so extensively corrected. A glance at the transcription will show just how common these corrections are. They are especially frequent in the Septuagint portion. They range in date from those made by the original scribes in the 4th century to ones made in the 12th century. They range from the alteration of a single letter to the insertion of whole sentences. It is well known that Origen, the Alexandrian church father in the early 3rd century, has said, "The differences among the manuscripts of the Gospels have become great, either through the negligence of some copyists or through the perverse audacity of others. They either neglect to check over what they have transcribed, or in the process of checking they lengthen or shorten as they please. So we have, by an Alexandrian church father's own admission, that various manuscripts in Alexandria by 200 AD were already corrupt." Another of the early church fathers, Irenaeus, writing in the 2nd century, though not in Alexandria, made a similar admission on the state of corruption among New Testament manuscripts. Although many of the so-called experts in academia have maintained that the apostles and Jesus himself would have used the Septuagint as their chief record of the Holy Scriptures, there is absolutely no reason that Jesus himself would have preached from a Greek version of the Old Testament. This seems extremely unlikely. It is known that the Jews at the time of Christ used Aramaic and spoke Aramaic, a language which is very similar to the Hebrew of the Old Testament. It is very likely that there were very few Jews who actually used Greek as their primary language. In addition to these facts, there are no quotes in the Bible that come from the Septuagint text. Augustine himself seemed to believe that the Greek Septuagint was indeed inspired by God in opposition to the Hebrew text. Jerome rejected this notion, however, because he knew that the Septuagint was developed by Origen, who had used several corrupt Greek manuscripts to produce it. It is taught that Origen worked on restoring the Septuagint between 220 and 250 AD. He himself claimed that there were as many different Greek translations as there were manuscripts. As he worked on his restoration, he had the translations of Aquila, Theodosian, and Symmachus in front of him. He also claimed to have 2 other Greek manuscripts that he found in a jar and at least 2 corrupted copies of the true Septuagint. This is written by Dr. David L. Brown in his book entitled The Indestructible Book, the Septuagint, LXX, Chapter 2, on page 30. In 1588, 23 years before the release of the King James Bible, William Whitaker wrote that the learned men question whether the Greek version of the which is now extant be, or be not, the version of the 70 elders. The more sound opinion seems to be that the Septuagint is wholly lost, and that the Greek text, as we have it, is a mixed and miserably corrupted document. This is written by Dr. David L. Brown in his book entitled The Indestructible Book, the Septuagint, LXX, Chapter 2, on page 25. The Apostle Paul stated in the 1st century in 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 17, "For we are not as many which corrupt the word of God, but as of sincerity, but as of God, in the sight of God speak we in Christ." We can see that the Scriptures were being corrupted and changed, even back in Paul's day. So we need to beware of ancient corrupt texts. Colossians chapter 2, verse 8 further says, "Beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit, after the tradition of men, after the rudiments of the world, and not after Christ."
and you will be hated by all for my name's sake. But he who endures to the end will be saved. In other words, you will never be accepted. You'll never be the world religion. You'll never be embraced by the entire universe. You'll be hated. If you are true believers, if you believe in me. The Bible says in John 15:18, if the world hates you, you know that it hates me before it hates you. In James 4:4, adulterers and adulteresses, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Whoever therefore wants to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. John 3:19, and this is the condemnation, that the light has come into the world, and men love darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. With Jesus, they hate you. Without Jesus, they accept you. In other words, Jesus is saying, hey, you will have to come to the end of yourself in order to accept me. It's not about you anymore. It's about what I did for you.
In Reformation times, Martin Luther in 1520 and a number of his followers identified the papacy or the Roman Church with the harlot Babylon. She is repeatedly pictured by contemporary artists as wearing the identifying triple crown upon her head. Many writers identifying the woman Babylon with the Roman Church saw the Pope as the seventh head or form of the Roman government on the beast. In the Roman Catholic Counter-Reformation, this universal testimony was decried and denied by others who insisted that Babylon is restricted to the pagan Rome of the past. Some, as Francisco Ribera, saw it as both pagan Rome and also Christian Rome of the time of the future Antichrist, after it will have fallen away from the popes. And after the Reformation, numerous well-known expositors maintained the historic Protestant position on Revelation chapter 17. In the early 19th century, many understood that the woman indeed was Roman Babylon, and taught of the seventh head of the beast as papal, or later the eighth head. Even the Jesuit Lacunza insisted that the apocalyptic harlot is papal Rome, and not, as Catholic commentators generally maintained, Rome of the distant past or future. Some post-Reformation expositors began to suggest as well that the papal Babylon of Revelation 17 is as a mother having daughters bearing the same family name. In the early church, it was held that the prophecy of the four wild beast symbols of Daniel 7, followed by the establishment of the kingdom of God, simply paralleled, repeated, and amplified the prophetic outline of the four metals of the great prophetic statue of a man and the shattering stone in Daniel. Both visions were recognized as God's portrayal of the rise and fall of nations and the charting of the course of world empires, with most developments recognized as they came to pass. Reference to the 10 kingdoms and the little horn in the Epistle of Barnabas, about AD 150, implies realization that the fourth beast was the then existing Roman Empire, with 10 kingdoms soon to be carved out of Rome, followed by the uprooting of 3 horn kings by the little king. This then is followed by allusion to the crooked course of the coming black one, or the lawless one, and his destruction at the second advent and judgment. Within the historical writings of the church fathers, Justin Martyr of Samaria, the first ante-Nicene church father, also connected the second advent with the climax of Daniel chapter 7 and alluded to the 3.5 times. Irenaeus of Gaul, who died around 202 AD, declared that the Roman beast, fourth kingdom, would end in a tenfold partitioning or division of the empire, with the little horn supplanting 3 of Rome's 10 divisions. Moreover, he identified Paul's Antichrist to be that man of sin with Daniel's little horn. To Irenaeus, the 3.5 times were 3.5 literal years, appropriate to the life of a single individual. And it was not until Joachim of Florus in the 12th century that the conception of 1260 literal years for these 3.5 times advanced. Then there was Tertullian of Carthage, writing in the 3rd century AD. He injected the additional thought that, according to Paul in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, that it was was actually the undivided continuance of the Roman Empire that delayed the Antichrist's appearance, and that its breakup into the 10 kingdoms would make way for Antichrist to emerge according to Daniel's prophecy. This same Antichrist would then ultimately be destroyed by the brightness of Christ's second advent. Then there was Hippolytus, writing around 200 AD, who had recognized the parallel of the corresponding factors of Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7. The golden head of the image is identical with the lioness, by which the Babylonians were represented. The golden shoulders and the arms of silver are the same with the bear. The bear pointed to the Persians and the Medes. The belly and thighs of brass are equivalent to that of the leopard, by which the Greeks who ruled from Alexander onwards are intended. Those legs of iron were pointing to the dreadful and terrible beast, by which the Romans who held the empire in his day were meant to identify. Then there was the toes of clay and iron, equivalent to those 10 horns which were to be afterward. The one additional little horn, springing up in the midst of the 10 horns, is that same Antichrist which must arise, the stone that smites the image and breaks it in pieces. And that filled the whole earth is Christ himself, who comes forth from heaven at his second advent to bring judgment upon the entire world. He who was living in the time of Rome's dominance, this same Hippolytus in AD 200, declared that the 10 kingdoms were yet to rise. A century later, just before the Council of Nicaea, Eusebius of Caesarea reiterated essentially the same position, paralleling Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7, with the same kingdom of God to be introduced by divine interposition at the second advent. To this, Cyril of Jerusalem had agreed that Daniel's 4 beasts represented the Babylonian, Persian, Macedonian, and Roman empires, with the Antichrist having his actual appearance after Rome's division, and additionally causing the humbling of 3 of the horn divisions to follow. In his outline, Chrysostom of Constantinople concurred, his own writing being at the close of the 4th century AD. Soon Porphyry, attempting to discredit the prophecy of Daniel, began teaching that the little horn of Daniel chapter 7 was simply fulfilled by Antiochus Epiphanes of the 2nd century BC. But what is left out of his conceptualization and teaching is the fact that Old Testament prophecy is actually a reoccurring phenomenon. We have ourselves repeatedly warned of the concept of a dual fulfillment of prophecy. Jerome, the well-known translator of the Latin Vulgate and the last comprehensive expositor of Daniel's prophecies before the Dark Ages, wrote in the 5th century and likewise identified the beasts of Daniel chapter 7 with the metals of Daniel chapter 2 to represent literal years. Jerome likewise named a number of the divisions of the Roman Empire, including the Vandals, Saxons, Burgundians, Alemanni, as well as others. He also declared that while the little horn was not fulfilled in Antiochus, but rather would be fulfilled the coming literal Antichrist, the great judgment, as well as the second advent of Christ, would follow the little horn's reign, which he continued to believe and teach that this time period would simply cover 3 1/2 literal years. The counter-reformation of the Roman Church had insisted through the Jesuits, see the writings of Francisco Ribera around 1591 and Luis de Alcazar writing around 1613, that the concept of Antichrist had referred only to a single individual rather than, or instead of, a system such as the papacy. A major doctrine taught by many of the reformers, the same 42-month period were to be understood as an actual 1260 literal days instead of the 1260 years, taught by reformers to refer to the rule of the papacy. Again, as we have noted on more than one occasion as regarding the prophecies, we have to continue to be aware of the concept of the dual fulfillment of prophecy, and likewise have an understanding of the same. There does certainly seem to be a historical as well as a futuristic meaning, which has been evidently intended by the Holy Spirit. Francisco Ribera made Antichrist a future infidel Jew and not a Christian. He was to reign in Jerusalem and not in Rome. His was the main Roman Catholic counterattack and became the standard Catholic position. But while Ribera thrust Antichrist into the future, Alcazar pushed him back into the past, making him a former pagan Roman emperor. There were also attacks against the year-day principle, and such teachings had restricted Daniel's little horn to a single Syrian king, Antiochus Epiphanes. In this way, all such attacks against the papacy, as being a fulfillment of such prophecy, could be deflected. Today, we have reaped the results of such a deflection throughout Christendom. Indeed, to teach the papacy holds a unique fulfillment of the Antichrist system, as well as the harlot of Babylon finds such proclamation as being in error and even divisive, especially in a world who looks to the Roman Catholic Church and papacy as the great message of Christian unity and ecumenicalism. The supplanting of the papal government with the banishment of Pope Pius VI from Rome in February 1798 AD, in which we had the entrance of the French Marshal Berthier into Rome on the 10th, and the dethronement of Pope Pius on the 15th, and the conveyance of the aged Pope out of the city on the 20th. This was hailed by prophetic interpreters on both sides of the Atlantic as the obvious termination of the 1260 years. It was recognized and proclaimed by various writers as another epical advance in interpretation. Of course, modern biblical scholarship and teaching from within the universities and throughout the church in general disclaims any truth to such prophetic significance. The standard historical school and its own exposition of Daniel chapter 7 became regarded as established, and by the majority, the 1260-year days were then believed to be historically past, extending from the time of Justinian to the French Revolution. More than any other single dating, 533, 1793 AD was often cited by this group, or dates within close proximity. There were also attempts to determine the relationship of the 1290 and 1335 years to the already accomplished 1260 years. This led to a few to add the extra 30 years of the 1290 days to the 1260-day prophecy. For instance, 1260 plus 30 was equal to 1290 days. Similarly, there will be added the 45 more days of the 1335 days, all converted into literal years of prophecy. For instance, there was 1290 plus the 45 days to be equal to the 1335 days, or of course the 1335 years. But where did this concept of the rapture, or who was the first person to speak about a pre-tribulation rapture? Such doctrine seems to have been originated by a young girl named Margaret MacDonald from Port Glasgow, being about 15 miles from Glasgow. By their suggesting that the origin of this doctrine might be traced back to this young and rather unlearned girl, religious leaders hoped to discredit the teaching. Surely God would not use a young girl to bring revelation of a doctrine ignored by the religious leaders of that day. Margaret MacDonald is said to have had charismatic-like experiences similar to today's Pentecostal tongues, prophetic, and other spiritual gifts, and may have been somewhat associated with the Morning Watch publication and Edward Irving. The Morning Watch did not credit Margaret MacDonald as its inspiration, although it does mention that there were indeed several young women having given deep revelation in a few broken sentences.
The charismatic renewal emerged after a student spiritual retreat in the United States in 1967. It seeks to relive the experience of the apostles when the Holy Spirit descended upon them at Pentecost. The Vatican has announced its plans to establish a unified international service for the Catholic Charismatic Renewal. It's called Charis and will be launched on December 8th. According to the Dicastery for Laity, Family, and Life, Charismatic Renewal has many different communities, initiatives for evangelization, and prayer groups, including many realities recognized in different dioceses or internationally. This organization will be in their service and help accommodate all their needs.
More than 60,000 people will pack Yankee Stadium tomorrow for a Night of Hope. It's a huge event featuring Lakewood Church pastor Joel Osteen and his wife Victoria. Before he arrived in New York, Osteen paid a special visit to the Vatican, where he met with Pope Francis. Tonight, Osteen shares the experience with Local 2 anchor Dominique Saxa.
As we sat down and talked about the preparations for the big event, Joel revealed to me an incredible opportunity he just had to meet with Pope Francis.
I just felt very honored and very humbled. Seeing the Pope give the Mass to 100,000 people that day, you just see, he has such a heart to help people. I love the fact that he's made the church more inclusive, not trying to make it smaller, but to try to make it larger, to take everybody in. So that just resonates with me.
With Rome behind him, Joel feels he has divine inspiration fueling his message for tomorrow night.
What is your secret to reaching people every day, every week, not only in your writing, but when you speak to them? What is it? What is this communication gift, if you will, if you could decode it?
The main thing is love always reaches people. Authenticity, humility. Pope Francis is the perfect example of this. He is doing everything right. You see, people will listen to what we say if they like what they see. And as our new Pope, he was very, very symbolic in, his first Mass with people of AIDS, his kissing of the disformed man, his loving the children, this authenticity, this humility, the caring for the poor. This is what the whole world expects us Christians to do. And when they go, oh, that's what a Christian does. In fact, there's a headline here in Orange County, and I love the headline. I saved it. It said, if you love Pope Francis, you'll love Jesus.
that was the headline?
That was the headline.
Oh.
It was the headline. I saved it. I showed it to a group of priests I was speaking to a while back.
I love that. When I walked into your office here, I was struck. You have 3 images and personal notes that confront a person walking into your office. And there is Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King, and Billy Graham. Why those 3? What do they give you, and what have they given you?
The only one who's missing was Pope John Paul II. Those 4 people were the greatest influences on the 20th century, without a doubt.
The Vatican recently sent a delegation here to Saddleback, the Pontifical Council, the Academy for Life.
The Academy for Life, exactly.
Tell me what they discovered and why did they come? This was a sizable group.
It was. There were about 30 bishops from Europe. One of the men who had been actually trained and mentored by Jean Vanier, and which is an interesting thing because we have a retreat center here, and my spiritual director, who grew up at Saddleback, actually went and trained under John Vanier too. So I'm very excited about that. But they were talking about the new evangelization, and Saddleback has been very effective in reaching secular mindset. So we figured out a way to reach that mindset, and I fully support the Catholic Church's new evangelization.
Tell me about the little breather you take in the day when you watch television, which surprised me. When we first met, you came up to me and said, hey, Raymond, and I said, I can't believe you watch this show.
You know what? I'm an avid fan of EWTN. I make no bones about it. I probably watch it more than any Christian channel because I happen to one of my favorite shows, which you repeat often, is the Chaplain of Divine Mercy.
Really?
Which I love. And when I've had a very stressful day, I'll come home, I've got it taped, and Kay and I will both listen. We'll put it on and just sit back, relax, worship, and in that time of reflection, meditation, quietness, I find myself renewed and restored. So thank you for continuing to replay the Chaplet of Divine Mercy.
Thank Mother Angelica.
Thank you, Mother Angelica.
They've already taught that Muslims are just as much saved as Christians, even though they deny that Jesus is the Son of God. The Quran comes straight out and says God has no son. The scripture clearly says, who is a liar but he that denieth that Jesus is the Christ? He is Antichrist that denieth the Father and the Son. Whosoever denieth the Son, the same hath not the Father, but he that acknowledgeth the Son hath the Father also. But they worship Mary. And if you go back and you look at the apparitions of Mary, the famous apparitions of Mary, there have been a lot of Muslims associated with that event as well. They worship Mary. They'll worship Mary as the virgin who conceived Jesus. They believe that. They teach that. They just don't believe Jesus was the Son of God. But they'll worship her. She's going to be moved to Babylon because Babylon doesn't exist yet. When this happens, and it's going to happen very soon, when it happens, Babylon is going to
all of a sudden, like overnight, just rise up. Great wealth. There's going to be people, because of the apparition, people are going to come from all over to see the apparition. They're going to bring all their money. All this money is going to start pouring into Iraq. Something else is going to happen. I'm jumping ahead here, but
the United Nations meetings take place in many different countries, including New York, Geneva, Vienna, and Nairobi. Locations of UN meetings in various locations include New York, where the UN headquarters in New York City is the permanent residence of the Security Council. The General Assembly also holds its regular sessions at the UN headquarters in New York. In Geneva, there is a duty station of the UN. In Vienna, there is a duty station of the UN. The United Nations office at Vienna was established in 1980. In Nairobi, there is a duty station of the UN. In Vancouver, Canada, the first United Nations Conference on Human Settlements was held in Vancouver in 1976. In Istanbul, Turkey. The second United Nations Conference on Human Settlements was held in Istanbul in 1996 in Quito, Ecuador. The third United Nations Conference on Human Settlements was held in Quito in 2016. Additionally, the UN also has a development program that works in nearly 170 countries and territories.
remember we talked about changes coming to the United Nations? I believe the United Nations is also going to move from New York over to Babylon. All this is going to go together. It's going to happen at the same time. When the Bible talks about Babylon, it doesn't talk about a great nation. In Revelation, it talks about a great city. It's not, great nations are Russia, Europe, United States of America, right? These are great country, great nations. Canada is even, you could even call. But when it talks about Babylon of the last days, it talks about a city. It's not a nation. It's not a nation. It's a city. A city which has such wealth, is going to have more wealth generated in it than any other city in the world. Right now, the United States holds control over the economics of the world. The U.S. dollar is still the strongest currency. Of course, there's no gold backing it, and the nations have caught on. We just keep, running the press and just making money. It's almost like monopoly money. There's coming a time when there's coming to an end, and nations have already, for the last couple of years, they've been objecting to the United States having that position. They want it transferred over to one independent source. That independent source will be all economics are going to go through the United Nations. That's going to be the new world order. Then everybody is going to benefit from it in common, not just the United States. So it's a good plan as far as the rest of the world is concerned. So that's going to be located there. All economics is going to pass through there. We've already given up the internet. Now that we've given up the internet, it's going to come under the control of the United Nations. And now when you buy things off the internet, they're going to put fees. And it's going to go directly to the United Nations. And all this money is going to flow into this Babylon. The worship of this apparition is going to draw people. All this finance is going to come in. That's how it's almost going to become a city overnight, a great city overnight. How many have heard about this apparition from Warraq, Egypt, 2009, and then I think it actually started in 1968. It's been repeating itself, actually, in Egypt. At the first time that it came, there were like 200,000 people saw it at the same time. And ever since then, there's been reappearances in this area of what they believe is Mary. Now she doesn't talk; she just sits there, and be's an apparition, a goddess of some sort. Now, whether she's going to finally appear when she does and she's going to claim to be Mary, but she's probably going to extend that. She's probably going to say, Jesus was my son, Muhammad was my son, Buddha was my son. She's going to extend it. I am Mary to those who worship me as Mary. I am, and she'll start naming up some goddesses. And there she will be. The resurgence, you can see all over the world, the resurgence of paganism throughout the world, especially in Europe, but throughout the world. When that happens in Babylon, all these temples are going to be re-erected. Pagan worship is going to be re-erected. There's going to end up being one religion. And all money is going to come, all religious money is going to come, it's going to be taxed into that location. All economics will be taxed in that location. The city is just going to burst overnight. What am I telling you? If we see it in our days, the best investment you can make is to bet on the devil. Ooh, that sounds antichrist there. Bet on the devil. But no, we know from the Word of God that this city of Babylon is just going to flourish overnight. I don't know how you bet on it or invest in it, because unfortunately I don't have the money to do so. But people who have witnessed these apparitions, they really believe in it, right? And this is all it's going to take for the world to unite together. And then anyone who doesn't follow after that is going to be, persecuted for not joining up with them. And when this happens, the Pope is going to move from the Vatican. The Pope's when this apparition comes and the United Nations gets, the Pope isn't going to stay in Vatican City. He's going to move where the wealth is. He's going to move where his star apparition is. Because remember, he's getting promoted. Right now, he's the pastor of the greatest Christian religion, right? Or what people say, the greatest Christian, the largest Christian religion in the world. And some would say he's actually the pastor of all Christians. It's just a lot of Christians don't accept him. But he's going to be elevated to pastor or religious leader of all religion throughout the world. All religion is going to have to answer to the Pope. He's going to resign his position. In fact, this current Pope's already talked about. He's not going to be a Pope forever. He's going to resign. He's going to retire. Why? Because I think he's going to take that next position. Anyway, what we have here, here's the map. Remember Pergamum, by the way, what was there? The seat of Satan, right? It's attached to Iraq. And here we got the apparition. This is where it's going to happen. Down here, underneath here, is the Persian Gulf. So that's where this whole great city is going to rise. I believe it's going to be a literal city of wealth, unbelievable wealth. You can't even imagine the wealth that's going to come through that city. The Hebrew word ephah means a particular measure for grain, being the standard measure for grain and similar articles, since it was classified with balances and weights in the injunctions regarding just dealing in trade. It is therefore, by definition, it is the measure of commerce. And the Babylon of Revelation 18, that's all you see. You have the religious nature in Revelation 17, and you have this great commerce, this great city. Remember when it's destroyed, all the kings and the merchants, they all cry and wail because who's going to buy all my stuff? That's why I said, if you see it happen, bet on Babylon, because it's going to happen. You can see a balance down here, which is symbols representing, supposed to represent all commerce. All commerce. Remember, we talk about no one could buy or sell unless they had the mark. The mark's going to be tied to the whole international computer system. And whoever's in control of that is going to get a little bit, it's almost like even if it's a 5% tax. Just think, every transaction in the world, and you're paying 5% to the United Nations. Just think how wealthy that place is going to become overnight. Here's a prophecy that, how many ever heard of Mene, Tekel, Upharsin? Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. This is also from the book of Daniel, so it has to be significant, having to do with prophecy. Does anybody think that that's probably true? I mean, we've seen so many things that are important in the book of Daniel, right? So we're going to look at this. Daniel chapter 5, verses 1 through 6, because I think this will knock your socks off too. Belshazzar, the king, made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords, and drank wine before the 1,000. And this is at the end of the Babylonian reign, right before Cyrus comes in from Persia and takes over Babylon. And Belshazzar is the king. Nebuchadnezzar's long gone. Daniel's still there, though. Belshazzar, while he tastes the wine, commanded to bring the golden and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple, which was in Jerusalem, that the king and the princes and his wives and their concubines might drink therein. In other words, all of the temple utensils that were taken when Nebuchadnezzar tore down the temple, he carried off all the treasures. They're going to use those to celebrate their orgy, and during their orgy, and during this dinner, and your false gods and whatever they're praising. Then they brought the golden vessels that were taken out of the temple of the house of God, which were at Jerusalem. The king and his princes, his wives and his concubines drank in them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, of brass and iron and wood and stone. Wow, that kind of sounds like commerce, doesn't it? In the same hour came forth fingers of a man's hand. Now this is what's cool. During all this, all of a sudden, a hand appears in the air. Like this, with its fingers sticking out. And it's flying across the room. This will freak you out. It's just a hand. There's no elbow, there's no wrist. Just a hand. The same hour came forth fingers of a man's hand, and he wrote against the candlestick upon the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. Then the king's countenance was changed. I guess so. And his thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his loins were loosed. We won't go into that. And his knees smote once again. You ever been so scared your knees rock? That's real. You can get so scared that your knees will hit each other. And that's what's happening here. And the part about his joints of his loins loose, I think we can imagine what it meant there. Yes. And the king cried aloud to bring in the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers. And the king spake and said to the wise men of Babylon, whosoever shall read this writing and show me the interpretation thereof shall be clothed with scarlet. Remember, the woman, by the way, is dressed in scarlet, purple and scarlet, and have a chain of gold upon his neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Then came in all the king's wise men, but they could not read the writing, nor make known to the king the interpretation thereof. Then was King Belshazzar greatly troubled, and his countenance was changed in him. His lords were astonished. I think that's worse than astonished. Now the queen, by reason of the words of the king and his lord, came into the banquet house, and the queen spake and said, O king, live forever. Let not thy thoughts trouble thee, nor let thy countenance be changed. There is a man in the kingdom. Who do you think it is? Daniel. There is a man in the kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods, and in the days of thy father light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods was found in him, who King Nebuchadnezzar thy father the king, I say, thy father made master of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers. Look at that, Daniel. We're going to drop down to 5:24 through 31. There's more, but I want to get to the point here. So in verse 24, then was the part of the hand sent from him, and this writing was written. This is the writing that was written. Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. I never heard that before. Mene, mene. Doesn't sound like anything I ever listened to. Daniel says this is the interpretation of the thing. Mene. In other words, the word meaning, God has numbered thy kingdom and finished it. Tekel, thou art weighed in the balances and are found wanting. Perez, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. This is like the night before. While they were partying, Darius the Median, the Persians were already taking over the kingdom. What they had done, remember Euphrates went down through Iraq and there was Babylon. The Euphrates River went right into Babylon. And so what they did is they shut the water down and they were able just to walk right in there. They didn't have to go through the gates. It was strategy. Nobody ever expected anybody to dam up the river so they could get in. And so that's how he didn't even know what was going on. And Daniel tells them, God has numbered thy kingdom and finished it. You're weighed in the balances and are found wanting, and your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Then commanded Belshazzar, and they clothed Daniel with scarlet, put a chain of gold around his neck. They made a proclamation concerning him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. And that night was Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, slain. They killed him. Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. So 62 years old, but it had a secret message in it, and this is for us today. See, that was the immediate fulfillment, but it had a secret message. Now look at this. Mene was a coin which represented 50 shekels. So you had mene, that's 50 shekels and 50 shekels. A tekel it was 1 shekel. So what do you have? 50 plus 50 plus 1. Right? 101. Then upharsin was 25 shekels. So that was a total of 126 shekels. Right? And the scripture here in Ezekiel says a shekel shall be 20 gerahs. A gerah is also a coin, and it will be used in the millennial kingdom, according to Ezekiel. And he said 20 gerahs will equal 1 shekel. So you got 126 shekels times 20 for the number of gerahs. It comes out to 2,520 gerahs, right? Now, remember we talked about the 7 times? Anybody remember that 7 times? This is another scripture about the 7 times. See, it's 2,520. It's a sign. Many tekel upharsin. Now, let's see. We have a whole video, by the way, on just the 7 times. We talked about the mystery of the 7 times and what was meant by the prophetic 7 times. Now, you can go back. You can watch that whole video that we have out there. We never talked about this in particular, though. Remember the scripture, I have appointed thee each day for a year. Before they talked about days, and there was 2,520 days. But now we see that the gerah, he's also talking about 2,520. What was he referring to? Nebuchadnezzar begins his reign in 605 BC, and the Babylonian captivity begins around 606 BC. 7 times equals 7 years. 1 year equals 360 days. 7 times 360 equals 2,520. That's what we had in many tekel upharsin. 2,520. 2,520 years are decreed. Cyrus the Persian takes the throne. In 538, Babylon is conquered. The Babylonian kingdom would be postponed to allow for 7 more times to pass over. Because what happened at the fall of Babylon, remember there was something that happened earlier with Nebuchadnezzar where he went crazy for 7 years, and then when he came back, this city, then his kingdom recovered, and that was also a prophecy. Well, here we say that when this happened, when the fall came to Babylon, the kingdom now of Babylon would be postponed to allow for this 7 more times, or 2,520 years to pass. So when we do the math, what happens? Cyrus the Persian was in 539 BC. The Babylonian kingdom was postponed for 2,520 years. You take the 2,520 minus the 539 minus the year, because you got AD and BC. You come up with 1980 AD. That's pretty close to where we live, right? Did anything happen of significance at that time? In 1979 AD, Saddam Hussein officially became the president of Iraq. All the stuff we talk about, Babylon's going to become central focus in the world. And he was rebuilding. In fact, he said over and over, I am Nebuchadnezzar reincarnated. Saddam Hussein officially claimed to be the reincarnation of Nebuchadnezzar. Remember this guy who had a lot of news about him during this time. Babylon, look at Babylon. He restored all this. And you see the walls with the lions on the walls. Saddam Hussein believed he was destined to rebuild the city of Babylon. Did he do it? He sure did give it a good start.
But that is a modern day Tower of Babel. It has been rebuilt.
There was also a judgment upon Israel regarding the 7 times more judgment. First, the judgment began with Nebuchadnezzar's Babylonian captivity in 606 BC. Nebuchadnezzar became the king, the head of gold. You have one biblical year, which is 360 days. You got one prophetic day equals 1 year. One time equals 1 year, which is 360 years, a day for a year, right? So you got 360 years. You multiply the 7 times, you get, once again, 2,520 biblical years. If you take the 2,520 years and you subtract the 606 BC, you come up with the year 1914. Was that significant? World War I, 1914. The war, from God's perspective, was to free Israel from who? Turkey. In 1917, the end of World War I, it started in 1914, the land of Israel no longer was under the dominion of the beast kingdom, which was the Ottoman Empire, the Caliph, if you will, or the Caliphate, which was Turkey, which was over that. The head of the Caliphate, or the Ottoman Empire, was Turkey. And of course, you had World War I. It began 28th of July, 1914. It lasted until November 11th, 1918. To me, that is so significant because this shook the whole world. This shook the United States. This just shook us up. And do you know how much prophecy has gone out since this time? When this happened, when World War I happened, people began to pay attention and talk about the end times. Many people came to the Lord because of it. And Israel was freed because of it. We talked about this also. Remember, it all revolved. Remember, it's Rome. It continues to exist. It rose up. It was there in the days of Jesus. It became the Holy Roman Empire. It started there. You can see the First Reich. But then we talked about, then there was the Second Reich. Remember we talked about it? And then there was the Third Reich, which is Hitler. And there's going to be one more Reich to come, according to the Bible. We have the dragon there, because we don't know who it's going to be. But it's going to be the final European empire. Kind of like, if you want a title, it'd be like, The Empire Strikes Back. Then you have this very interesting prophecy in Psalm 83 where it talks about 10 horns or 10 kingdoms. Psalm 83 mentions 10 kingdoms. You can see it in the Psalm. Edom, the Ishmaelites, the Moab, the Hagarites, the Gebal, Ammon, Amalek, Philistia, Tyre, and Ashur. And here's the modern day territories. Edom was Jordan, southeast Israel. Ishmaelites were consisted of the Arabs, Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Kuwait, and Sudan. Moab was Jordan. The Hagarites was Jordan. Gebal was Jordan. Ammon was Jordan. Amalek was Jordan, Iraq, and Kuwait. Philistia was Gaza. Tyre was Lebanon. And Ashur was Syria, Iraq, southeast Turkey. You see a beast with 10 horns. What does all that mean? If you plot them out, here's the 10 horns from Psalm 83. Remember, the beast has 10 horns. Right? Well, here's the 10 horns. What's right above it? Europe, right? Europe is the beast, and you can see the 10 horns underneath. One of the horns there, you see Turkey? Then you have the war of Gog and Magog. You have the countries that are represented there by name. You got Magog, which is Turkey. Meshech is Turkey. Tubal is Turkey. Persia is Iran. Cush is Sudan. Put is Libya. Gomer is Turkey. And Togarmah is Turkey and Armenia. And we showed a similar map to this here. You can see the nations that make up these nations that come against Israel in Ezekiel 38, 39. Here they are again, and you definitely saw this map before. It's just prettier. And so now, if you put it all together, here is the beast, the latter day empire, represented by that fourth beast. You have what used to be Rome. Right? And now you've got all what God calls the 10 horns. He names the 10 horns in Psalm 83. And you also have the representations here of these last kingdoms. Remember in Revelation 13:2, he said the beast was a combination of the lion, which was from Babylon Empire, the bear, which was Medo-Persian, and the leopard, which was Greece. And if you add those three beasts together, all the geographical area with the 10 horns, and you've got the European common market, look what you got here. This is that final kingdom, the final empire. Now again, I don't know that this is going to be one empire, or if what this represents is that this is what I think. This is the caliphate. What's in gray here is going to be the caliphate. And what's in yellow there is going to be the European Union. And they're going to be trading partners. They're going to be in and out, working together. They are going to become the largest and the greatest empire ever to have existed and known to man. And what do you have right down here? Right in the middle of it all, you have Iraq, which is going to be renamed Babylon. Here's where the city of Babylon would be. You're going to have the apparition, which is showing up here. You're going to have the Pope, the Vatican, move over here. The Pope's going to change his title. He will come out and say that Jesus was not the Son of God. He has to do it to appease all those Muslims. Remember, he's not now the president of the Catholic Church. He's now the president of all, or the prophet of all religions. And it just won't do to have the main prophet over all the religions. It just won't do for the rest of the religions for him to say Jesus was the Son of God. He's got to say that Jesus is no better than Muhammad, or they're not going to combine together. And so this is what you have in the last days. And this is when I say, so you're going to have the apparition, you're going to have, and you're going to have the United, remember we talked about the United Nations, so the United Nations is going to be located here. You're going to have this empire here, and right here you're going to have the great city of wealth. They've already got all that oil, but there's going to be such a great city, and all of this commerce is going to open up. It's just going to be something like nobody's ever experienced before. Now, what happens to the United States in all this, I don't know. But the United States is not going to be the superpower of wealth that it was. And remember, the United States
is over $36 trillion in debt.
When this happened, when the new United Nations, when the New World Order hits, they're going to have a new economic system. And all that debt, it's either going to be erased, and they're going to say, we're going to start all over. They're going to erase the books. And that might be why your politicians don't care if we keep going in debt, because they're basically claiming bankruptcy. But the edge that may put them on top, they don't have that anymore. All the money is now, even the surrender of the internet, is all going to be going to Babylon, which is going to be more central to this empire. You all see it? And then you have the prophecy in Daniel. Remember the image? At the end of the image, he said this will last until the end. The final thing you're going to see is the feet and the toes. He says this. And remember, you have all the 300 million Muslims are now working in Europe, because that's where all the jobs are. Okay? It's like, you scratch my back, I'll scratch it. You're going to have this economic relationship. As the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay. Remember, iron was Rome. Clay is the Muslims. And so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. Whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves together with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. That's what you basically see today in Europe. You know, some people say 20% Muslim. Some say 15%. In some areas of Europe, they say it's as bad as 30%. It's really getting out of hand. But one thing they know for sure, this hand doesn't mix with this one. Christianity does not mix with Muslim or Islam. And that's the job of the Pope, to get them to mix together. Of course, he's not going to be able to do that, and that is going to fail. over time it's going to fail, because we know that, remember the 10 horns attack the harlot, remember? They devour her. If you look at an ancient map, see, if you've studied prophecy for years, you've probably heard that the instigator is Russia. And you know how goofy it is? They take a word in the prophecy, which is in Hebrew, in English it's chief. It says it's translated as the chief prince. In Hebrew, the word is Rosh. It has nothing to do with Russia. Russia doesn't come from that word, Rosh. It sounds like it in English. And they say, see, Rosh is the chief, so therefore it's Russia. But that's not true. If you look at ancient maps, you'll see that everyone listed Togarmah, Gomer, Meshech, Tubal, Magog. If you look in Noah's Ark, remember Noah's Ark is where? In Turkey, right? I believe God's there to show you where all these nations came. If you go back and look, all these nations were named at the time of Noah. They're all about Turkey, and ancient maps will show that.
Karakol, Pakistan.
Uzbekistan.
Turkmenistan. Kazakhstan.
Tajikistan. Kyrgyzstan.
All of these are Turkish, Muslim, and they used to be part of the Soviet Union. And it might be that people years ago, when they were trying to put this together, see, it was all part of the Soviet Union. But now that it's split off, you can tell all of this is going to be following the lead of Turkey at the time. So all of that we've seen in the previous maps, this is going to go with it too. Plus the Bible talks about Antichrist being, he calls it the Assyrian. Did you notice that the Assyrian Empire was this? It was made up of Turkey, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, and Iran, and the rest of you can see it go back there. So that was the Assyrian Empire. And you can see how everything that the Bible talks about is all coming together. It's all coming together at once. And that would be the kingdom of Antichrist. But remember, it's not just, this is the caliphate. And it also, the caliphate's not only this, but it also comes down here, right? But then you've got Europe tied to the empire, so that the two of them are working. And, that's not so unbelievable, because remember when Constantine set up Rome, he moved his throne. He left Rome, he went to Constantinople, which was Turkey. He set up the east and the west part of the empire. It was one empire. It worked like one empire. Eventually became two. But that may be the vision. Whoever comes up with this plan, that may be their vision, based upon what Constantine did. But just like the Roman Empire, there was the east and the west. There's going to be the east and the west of these empires. I believe they'll be independent. Caliphate's not going to be. I don't believe that Turkey is actually going to become a part of them, and that the whole caliphate will be under the emperor. I believe that they're going to be independent, but they're working together. And it's just like the feet, the clay and the iron. See, if it says that the clay mixed with the iron and it all became iron, then that would make sense. Or if it says the iron mixed with clay and it all became clay. It doesn't say that. So the iron tried to mix with the clay and it could not mix. And it just kind of all mixed up. And that's what we have. But here's the caliphate. It was the Assyrian Empire. Oh, by the way, that Assyrian Empire, that's what ISIS wants to establish right now. That's their whole point. Also, here's something. Satan is coming home to Turkey. In March of 2006, the nation Turkey, after failing to convince Germany to return the altar, decided to rebuild a perfect replica of the ancient altar on the same ancient hill in Bergama. That's when a decision was made, the location of the ancient Pergamon. In March 2006, Turkish Culture and Tourism Minister Attila Cox stated that there is no chance of having the altar returned from Germany because we have no legal right, but now we have a new project to make exactly exact copies, replicas of those historical artifacts, and they will be built on the original site. This certainly wonders if the same dark anti-Semitic spirit that seems to have followed this ancient satanic altar to Germany will now also become a welcome home in Turkey. In fact, there are many reasons to believe that this is already the case. There is an article out there right now that remember we showed the current president of Turkey. He's the one that says I think it's 2024, this will be available. This will be already built and open up for tourism. The altar of Satan will be back in Pergamus. Isn't that interesting how all this is happening together, and now they're going to reestablish, right? Not just the altar of Satan, but the altar just where it used to be, as well as all the rest of the pagan artifacts and temples. And they're going to put it all out there. Why would a Muslim build all those pagan temples? Because he must know, he must have the spirit of the devil. He must know that Allah is nothing more than the moon god. He must know. Now hopefully we won't be here for this, right? Of course, that's the Antichrist kingdom.
It's not that far away.
It's not that far away. That's not that far. It's just another button on the cloth, if you will. It's another thing that we can look and say, wow, this is all happening in front of our eyes. Again, back to these 10 horns and the horn rising up, because we still have a prophecy for last days here with this in Daniel. It says, thus, Daniel 7:23 through 24, and Daniel 11:43, we're going to go to. Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon the earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, shall devour the whole earth, shall tread it down, break it in pieces. When we put it all together, can you see how it's devouring the whole earth? And the 10 horns out of the kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall rise after them. He shall be diverse from the first. He shall subdue 3 kings. Looking in Daniel 11:43. Speaking of the Antichrist, remember part of those horns, those 10 horns we saw in Psalm, were Egypt, Libya, and Ethiopia, or which we call it Sudan. Because remember, the word Ethiopia it was Cush in the Bible. But he shall have power, Antichrist shall have power over the treasures of gold and of silver and over all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Ethiopians, they all shall be at his steps. Those are they basically, it sounds like they're not going to willingly cooperate, and so he's going to bring them down. And what will you have when you take 10, you take them away? You're going to have 7, just like before.
The United Arab Emirates inaugurated the Abrahamic Family House, an interfaith complex housing a mosque, a church, and the Gulf Arab states' first ever purpose-built synagogue. Designed by renowned Ghanaian British architect David Ajay, the project incorporates several architectural styles traditionally found in mosques, churches, and synagogues around the world. The structure draws inspiration from the 3 Abrahamic faiths and is meant to encapsulate their similarities. The Moses ben Maimon Synagogue honors the 12th century Jewish philosopher known as Rabbi Maimonides. The scholar was also a medical doctor who led the Mediterranean Jewish world and whose patients included Saladin, the Muslim ruler of Egypt and Syria. The synagogue is the UAE's first purpose-built Jewish place of worship, and like most synagogues around the world, is oriented towards Jerusalem. It is inspired by the Jewish festival of the Sukkot, which is celebrated by building temporary shelters. An oculus in the ceiling of the space lets direct light come inside. The light of the midday kisses the rabbi in the center very directly, Ajay said. The Jewish community in the UAE had previously used makeshift synagogues. While entirely unique, each individual building is a 30-meter by 30-meter cube. The unifying design is meant to provide a common base from which tolerance and understanding can be promoted, Ajay said. The Imam Al-Tayyib Mosque, which is named after the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, the leading authority on Sunni Islam, is oriented towards Mecca. Its windows are made of delicate lattice work called mashrabia and are designed to allow for the circulation of air while regulating light and maintaining privacy. What you're going to see in all the projects is that it's always about a filtering of light, a splitting of light, Ajay told CNN's Becky Anderson. In the mosque, the light surrounds you until you get to the silence and the stoicness of facing Mecca, he said. His Holiness Francis Church is dedicated to the 13th century monk saint, Francis of Assisi, after whom the current Catholic Pope is named. It is oriented towards the rising sun in the east. The ceiling is made of timber and is meant to invoke the biblical and Quranic story of Noah's Ark. In the church, I'll sure you hear the sound of rushing water, said Ajay. For me, water is so important with Christianity. The church is an ark in the world.